Hi, I am super excited to be joined by Jocelyn, who runs a YouTube channel, Instagram account as Ladies Who Bond. And I just wanted to chat to you because I thought you were cool and I thought you would have some really interesting input and insight into what it is I do, which I don't know. We don't really know each other. It's funny. I absorb so much of your content and I see you all the time, but we haven't actually interacted that much. But so so first of all, tell me who you are and tell me about Ladies Who Bond and everything like that.
Okay. Well, my name is Jocelyn, and I have been a longtime Bond fan since, I don't know, I mean, the start of it started in middle school, but I think a lot of it didn't really hit until high school. So that was a long time ago. We'll leave it there. And sometime back in 2019, I went on the Honor Majesty's Secret Service 50th anniversary trip. And that was the first time I actually interacted with the Bond community. And I made a couple of friends, like not like just normal people, normal fans, and I had a really good time. And as a result, I wanted to share some of my experiences, like through social media and stuff like that. And I kind of felt guilty sharing it with my normal friends. Uh, so that, and I mean, with the hype with No Time to Die as well, I felt kind of bad that half of it was bombarding people with James Bond stuff. So as a result, I ended up creating an Instagram account called Ladies Who Bond, and that is actually a play off of Ladies Who Lunch. So, because I realized that there weren't very many ladies out there in the Bond community. So I thought, well, I'll just share my stuff and hopefully that will lead to me connecting to other women out there, and also allowing me to connect with the Bond community. And it kind of took off from there. So all the create content creation, all that stuff that happened after like I just wanted to share my stuff, my personal things, and then that just exploded. Like people are like, you should do this and you should do that, and so, like people from the community supporting me really encouraged me to start creating content. So I created at a snail's pace because it's, I have a full time job and this is kind of my fun stuff on the side. But I mean, I like doing it, so it's been a trip.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think it's the other thing. I mean, the thing that grabbed me about you was you do this amazing ring dancing and stuff like that. So tell me about that, and also you're doing a project now with Bond related stuff. So I'd be interested to hear
Yeah,
what.
so about 6, 7 years ago, I lived in a different town, and I actually had they had a downtown area that I could walk to, and they had an aerial studio, and I said, "Oh, that looks like fun," because I like to work out, like despite my shape, people may or may not know, and I'm always willing to try new things. So I said, "Okay, well, I'll take a class and see how it goes," and then that kind of just dragged me in. So, so I've been training about 6, 7 years, and I primarily do what they call aerial hoop or lyra. Those are the two things that they call it. But I also kind of dabble in everything else just for cross training. But it's a great way to not only stay fit and strong, but it's also a way of expressing oneself through dance. So a lot of times, like the videos that I put on my Instagram, a lot of times, like I actually don't plan the routine out. It's just like play the music and go. So that's like sometimes I'll have people vote on like what they want to listen to, and then I'll go from there. Just because I need some inspiration. And then I also now have a personal project where I want to create a routine and film to every single Bond theme song. And I just happened to do No Time to Die first, just because it just seemed very fitting with like the way that the world was or is. And with that one, there's a little bit of a story behind that one because it was done for a virtual aerial project. So usually in my studio, we put out like 3 shows a year, and they're student shows. And so what happens is we'll do our normal training and classes and stuff like that, and then we'll we'll spend about about 10 weeks, and we'll put together a show, and usually the show has a theme, and then everyone has their story, as we call it. So since we couldn't do one like in public this year, we did a virtual one, and it was called Mementos, and it was basically capturing what 2020 was for, for that individual. So like for me, my story was, like No Time to Die was part of the, like, we were going to have this movie and now we don't have this movie. We have a theme song, and so that was kind of like, okay, well, that song is kind of encompasses what my year has been. And then just, picking movement and things of like what has been, like what 2020 was like for me. Like I didn't go through the suffering that a lot, and tragedy and trauma like a lot of people have. Like for me, like 2020 has been just kind of, I'm just gonna coast along, and and just move right, go along with the flow. And I mean, there was just a lot of stuff that was happening, and I was just like, I'm just gonna keep going forward so that everybody else will follow with me, and just hope that just being there as like a solid rock, so to speak, makes everyone else kind of hold on to something, while we're going through all this craziness. So that was, yeah, in a nutshell.
No, I think that's great. And one of the things I think is amazing about you is the fact that you put stuff like this out there. So, like, I know so many of us are racked by like imposter syndrome and stuff like that, and you just put it out there, which takes like so much courage to do, because you're like, oh my god, how are people going to react to that? And I think that's fantastic. I love watching it. I know how much strength it takes to like have to move around those things, and then yeah, you put it out there, which is like amazing. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all of the different. Which is your favorite Bond theme? Here's a good question.
Oh, that's so hard. Because I think it changes with my mood, really. Goodness. I'm not sure. I'm actually supposed to be working on a video with British Bond Addict in like a week or so here, that we're going to be covering the theme songs. So
Ah.
I've been racking my head over it.
You don't have
I
to
mean,
answer if you don't want to. If you want to keep it secret for that, maybe we could plug that as a.
no, it's just like there's so many great theme songs that I can't pick. I think it's more of that, really.
I
I
think you're
can tell you
right.
what I
About how it's a mood. You have to be in like a mood. But you were just about to tell me
yeah.
something, and I interrupted you.
Oh, I can tell you what I don't really care for. Um, I'm not too big on the Quantum of Solace theme song. And I know a lot of people don't, and I know there's a lot of people who do. So it's just not necessarily my cup of tea. I'll listen to it, but it doesn't really get me into any mood. Um, I think that's the only one that really just GoldenEye kind of hit. Is kind of a so-so. Like sometimes I'm really into it, and sometimes I'm not. Again, I guess it just depends on my mood.
Yeah, I know, because like if I wanted to pep myself up, I'll often put on what is it, Spy Who Loved Me, just because when it's like nobody does it better and you're shaving or whatever in the mirror, it makes you feel like. Okay, so middle school Jocelyn got into Bond movies. What was the first Bond movie you saw? What was middle school Jocelyn like?
So I actually hadn't seen any of the movies until high school. I got into James Bond through the music.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So in seventh grade, they needed a French horn player, and before that, I was playing trumpet, and so it was get into the bigger kids, concert band if you played this instrument, and I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I get into, I think it was like honors band. I think that's what they called it. And we were doing a band competition, because that's what you do. You pick pieces out, and then um, do you hear music?
I do. My phone is just going off. Hang on. No.
Oh,
That's fine. And I was like, she stopped talking. What was that? Don't. Let me just. Right. I am. So let's go back to.
you can cut that out, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Or-
Or I might just leave it in, because you've got your mug there now. That's a beautiful mug.
Mm.
Right. So you were in middle school and you wanted to join the higher up echelon of the band. So you were like, I'm going to grab the French horn and just play. You seem to be up for any challenge, which
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I live life. It's just like if there's something that interests me, it's just go for it, and try it. And a lot of times I kind of just dive right into things rather than well, to me it's like sticking a toe in the water, but maybe for a lot of people it's just like, wow, she kind of went all out. But I guess a lot of times, like, go big or go home. You're not going to have an experience if you just don't try, like going all in. But but anyway, so yeah, I started playing French horn in seventh grade, and then we had a band competition. And then, so one of the things that we played was seven or four pieces of like different James Bond theme songs, including the main theme. So it was the main theme, Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, and Live and Let Die.
Ooh, good mix.
Yeah, so we played all of those, and as kids we didn't really know what the movies were then, and that was actually when the 25th anniversary CD came out. And so in order for us to learn the music, our teacher would actually play the music on the CD player for us to listen to, so we could get an idea of how, like, the pacing and the syncopation and all that kind of stuff. And so one of my fondest memories is actually of Live and Let Die, where he plays the music, and it's basically class karaoke, where we, like, the first couple of minutes, like, we're all singing along, and like a bunch of, like, how old are we, like 10, 11, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds singing this song. It was so great, and it was just a lot of fun.
It's a banging song as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's great.
So that's amazing. So you got into the music, and what was the first Bond film you saw then? Because you hadn't seen any of that at that point.
Yeah, so then my first Bond film was Goldeneye.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely fall in that Goldeneye generation, like, of seeing. So I saw the movie actually through a VHS tape that my grandma had taped off of HBO. So, um, like, I hadn't even seen it in theaters yet. It was just like, okay, I'm just gonna, grandma taped it off of HBO, and she'll like tape four movies, and like you put it in the VHS player, and like movie night, right? So that was my first experience. And then my brother got GoldenEye 64. So
Yeah.
then there was, yeah, so it was like kind of sandwiched in, all together of like years of playing that game with him, and that.
And then, I mean, that's amazing. And then you got into it because the other thing is, Bond does seem to be like a guy's thing, and I wonder if that's because some of it is like the fantasy element. It's like James Bond is the guy all guys want to be. But what is it that appealed to you about like the whole franchise and everything like that?
So I think like spy and espionage stuff is really interesting to me. Before before James Bond, like, I was also really into Japanese animation and Japanese comics and stuff like that. And one of the first things I had read, which was probably a little bit too scandalous for my age, this was also probably in like seventh grade, is a comic book series called Gunsmith Cats. And it's about these two women, who are based in Chicago, and they're bounty hunters, and one of them is like an explosion specialist, and the other one is the bounty hunter. Like, she has a gun shop, and like she'll work with the city, the police department, and go and hunt these like drug dealers and traffickers and stuff like that. And they drive these muscle cars, and it's written by a guy, so some of it's kind of risque because it's also Japanese comics where it's like kind of censored, like sexy type of stuff, but all of it, like the way he illustrated like the fast action driving and the shooting and all this stuff, it was really interesting. And so that kind of really pulled me into, like, I really like this action stuff,
Yeah.
and the, like, the spying around. It's a different kind of spying, I guess, because it's more like bounty espionage. And then I think James Bond just kind of adds on to that. It was like there's this person who's going around and doing secret things, and there's a lot of and the action, which is kind of funny because I'm not a big movie buff. Like, that seems to be synonymous with a lot of Bond fans, is that they're big movie buffs and they know all of these movies, and I'm like, I just like James Bond.
No, I know. Okay, so one of the things that people are always criticizing James Bond for is like bad representation of women and things like that. And I think, in the 70s, especially with like Roger Moore and things, there were certain mistakes. What is your thought on that as an insight?
So I think if you're looking at it from just kind of the top layer, you could. I feel that people get that vibe that James Bond can be misogynistic, and he can be, and sometimes, like I think like in the Brosnan era, there were times where I was like, ooh, that wasn't so good, because I think a lot of it was just because of writing, and then some, and I think like the more like even happens in the Craig films where there are things where I'm like, ooh, that wasn't so good. And again, I think it was just like at the time it seemed like it was a good idea, but they didn't really think about it, and then it ends up falling short. But I mean, even in the Fleming books, like Bond is not a perfect character. And so I think if you start to look at it that way, I think you start to interpret it differently. Um, that's basically, yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I mean, there are times that I'm like, oh, well, that wasn't so good, But I mean, like with everything, like not everything is perfect. There will never be like a perfect character. Um,
And I mean, part of the strength of characters, I think, is when they're not perfect. I mean, you mentioned the books, and I think Ian Fleming had some great female characters, like Tiffany Case and Teresa de Vincenzo and stuff like that. I thought they were good. And some of the movies, like, what do you think of Vesper Lind in Casino Royale? I thought she was like amazing as a character, and Eva Green was fantastic.
yeah, yeah, I really like her a lot. She's probably up there under my top Bond women, just because her wittiness, against Bond is like she's on point with him, and I really like that a lot. Um, I mean, in all honesty, like I feel a lot of the movies actually were ahead of the curve when it comes to Bond, and women in society. I mean, like there were times like there are some scenes in Goldfinger that just they don't sit right now, like in like the 21st century, but like at the time then maybe these kinds of things weren't talked about then. Like I feel like there's been a big shift where we're becoming more aware of what's going on in the world, like especially after the whole Me Too movement, and starting to really acknowledge that these things were happening then. So it's like now we look at all these movies with a different lens, and sometimes that's kind of hard to cope with. But at the same time, like I'm also an advocate for not going back and changing those things, because we need to be able to look at these things and realize like that's what society was like then, and we need to do better. It's very much a time capsule, and for good and bad. Like Goldfinger is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And Pussy
you can't
Galore is
really.
great. Honor Blackman.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, she's great character. I mean, like when you think about it, like her as a Bond woman is like she wears pants, like
Yep.
at the time, like wearing pants was not a thing, right? So she's wearing pants in the movie, and she leads this whole troop of women to fly planes. She herself is a pilot. It's like her character entirely is just defying what women were like then. Like kind of, I guess, creating a new, like stepping forward and just moving society along.
That's it's so I don't know if you know anything about me, but I am a writer. I write, would you believe, romance novels, and my niche is I try and write action adventure stories in the mold of romance novels. And the interesting thing is, when you write contemporary romance, you have one chapter from a guy's point of view, the hero's point of view, and one chapter from the heroine's point of view, the woman's point of view. And to me, I find that really interesting because the heroine has to drive, more than 50% of the narrative, which in a lot of movies, especially male orientated things, it doesn't occur like that. So I think it's always interesting. If you were brought on board for Bond 26, and you had to, that I don't know, somebody was like, oh, look at you, Jocelyn, you're a woman, you should come up with the female characters of this, and pat you on the head, or whatever they do in Hollywood, being completely condescending and things. But what would you do differently? How would you make it better?
Um, I think I would definitely give women more character, like
Mm.
really define. Like I think that's the one thing about Quantum of Solace that I kind of enjoy is that like Camille, she actually has a whole backstory, and then she doesn't end up sleeping with Bond. Like she's like the first woman to basically walk away.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you think about that, in the number of movies, what number was that? Was that
3?
23? You know, so it's taken that long for them to have a female character who walks away, you know, doesn't go with Bond. Which is a little bit different from the books because we have like in Moonraker, you know, in the fourth book, you have one of the, you know,
Yeah,
women
Gala
who,
Brand. That was her name, wasn't it? I remember
yeah,
that because that stuck with me. I was like, oh, I like the fact that he didn't get the girl.
yeah. So I think it would be nice if there was a little bit of both. Like it'd be nice to have like one character who may want to be with Bond and then another character who, you know, doesn't want to be with him, you know, and just have more diversity. I think that's pretty much it. Like I have high hopes for No Time to Die because they brought in, you know, Phoebe Waller-Bridge,
Yes.
and I like we've got three plus Moneypenny, so we've right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we have a lot of women casted for the movie. So I just hope that they do justice in you know creating good characters. Um, and that's really hard to do with like an hour and a half, 2 hours of movie time
Yeah, especially
too.
with all the back. I was just thinking of Quantum of Solace. It's like the character of Strawberry Fields in that. It's like I hated that whole thing. It's like she meets him for the first time and is all snotty, and then within an hour she's in bed with him, and then she's dead. And I'm just like that to me is kind of like the that's not necess- that seemed like a very 1960s thing. And I know they kind of like tried to throw it back to Goldfinger, so she was covered in oil rather than gold paint. But I was like, oh wow, she just died. That was her purpose in the movie.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of those typical Bond, you know, Bond cliches. Is like you have Camille, which is like, oh, this is revolutionary, and then you have you know Strawberry Fields, and you're like, oh,
I guess they had to
okay,
balance it out, right?
yeah, yeah.
Where do you want them to go next with the movies? I mean, okay, so Daniel Craig is going to go. What's next? Who would be your pick for the next James Bond?
Um, so I've been kind of obsessing over Dan Stevens.
Oh, now that seems familiar. I'm gonna in my other thing. I'm gonna Google who Dan Stevens is so I can find out.
Yeah, so Dan Stevens, he was in the Eurovision movie that came out for Netflix, and then he
Oh,
was in Downton Abbey.
I can see him. Yeah, he's got quite a thin
Yeah,
face.
yeah. So I'm also he's gorgeous. So
I can see what you mean. He's got the intensity to his eyes. Every picture you have, it's
yeah,
like it's like those very blue, very intense eyes, which I could imagine James Bond having. Oh, I remember him in Eurovision. Now he had that gold
yeah,
brocade jacket. He was brilliant.
yeah. He's a really interesting actor because he tries not to stick to one thing. Like he's done a little bit of everything. There's a movie that I haven't watched. It's on my list of things to do. Is I forgot what it's called. Is it The Hunt? I don't know. It's some thriller movie that he's in, and he's supposed to be playing someone who he's not. And I think that's where a lot of like I've heard other people talk about him like being a contender for Bond, and it's because of that movie. Um,
That's
so
interesting. I could see that. Well, okay. I'm going to pick your brains now as a romance writer. Because
okay.
you've got Dan Stevens as your choice and stuff like that, and because he's gorgeous. Tell me, what is it that is. Because James Bond is like an attractive guy. I try and write romance books and I try and make my hero attractive. What is it that makes a good leading man, a good somebody could fall in love with as a guy?
Oh, that's all sorts of. That's a bag of. That's really hard because when you think about it, it's like there's a difference between what you want, like in romance novels and fantasy, and then versus like reality. I think those are two different things.
I know what you mean. It's like maybe you can't imagine like a Daniel Craig James Bond taking the rubbish out at the end of the day, or feeding the cat, or something like
Yeah, well,
that.
I mean, like I like the qualities that I love in my husband don't match up to like James Bond. Like those are just, like my husband is a lovely person. Um, but
He doesn't go around snapping people's necks or.
no, no, not at all.
But I think that the thing is like that's interesting about James Bond as a character is like women are supposed to find him attractive. Out of all the actors who've been in James Bond so far, who is the one that like pushes your buttons if any of them do?
Oh. So that's really interesting because I feel that with the Bonds previous, except for Craig, he hasn't really been for like the females' gaze, So
Ooh,
you know what I mean. So like with
absolutely.
Daniel Craig, it's like fully ripped, and he worked out for the movie and stuff like that, right? And that scene in Casino Royale where he comes out wearing the shorts and he's just like he's super ripped in the chest, and you're like, dang, and for the first time, I feel that we kind of get that, this is for ladies type of thing, where I don't feel you get that as much as in the previous Bonds.
No, it's.
Uh,
I remember when Roger Moore used to take his shirt off. It made me feel better about myself. I'm like, oh, I could be a secret agent apparently.
yeah, and I think that goes the same with Pierce. Like, I mean, if I were to go to bed with any of the Bonds, probably Pierce would be the one, just because, and some of it too, I think, has to do with the actor. It's just like very suave and debonair, like that's where. And then if and okay, so then like if we want to talk about like one night stand with a good looking guy, then probably Daniel Craig,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But again, like that's kind of hard to separate the actor from the character.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's Daniel Craig when he comes across. It's very interesting. He's very like as Bond. He's very terse and sort of says the minimum of stuff like that. Whereas Pierce Brosnan is just so charismatic. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, and both of those have good qualities. I with Craig and not saying very much, like in the movies, like that air of mystery also makes it very appealing. Um, which is kind of nice because then you want to know like what's inside his head, and I think that like with Vesper, it's like she's trying to get in,
Yeah,
and he's not letting her, and I think that happens, when you're playing, when you're romancing and you're flirting, right, and you don't want to give everything away, and you want to lead somebody on, and like kind of, well, not lead somebody on, but just it's just that air of mystery of like I need to know what it is now, like.
it's like playing with a cat where you got a string and you're like pulling it back and forth. That scene on the train in Casino Royale is like iconic.
So good.
Yeah,
So
the
good.
sass between them is fantastic. So that's really interesting to know. Okay, so to the big takeaway from this is out of all the Bonds, the one you would have a one night stand with is Daniel Craig. Good.
I think so.
I found what you said though about all of the previous Bonds not being for the female gaze. I think that's so accurate. And I was just thinking, like, I think Bond is so popular among guys because we all want to be Bond. We want to dress like Bond. We want to have the unlimited expense account and stuff like that. So many of my friends who are Bond fans are actually gay because they're like, I want to dress like that. I want to do that. And it's so interesting when you put it for the male perspective. What I find really interesting is if you chat to all of the male Bond fans, most of them are happily married in a loving relationship and stuff. They're not the philanderers that Bond is famous for. And I almost think this is why, like, I like writing romance novels because I think almost that's the component that Bond films kind of get wrong. It's like, I think the best Bond films are the ones with a really strong love story, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Casino Royale.
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on. I mean, those stories are really good. I really like them a lot. But sometimes it's kind of nice as a Bond fan just having an espionage story where there isn't. You're just going on an adventure and leaving it at that.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about when you mentioned Camille. It's like, they didn't end up together, but it was still it was still a wild ride, and that made her a stronger figure because she wasn't. I sometimes think some of these 70s movies, especially, it's like they throw all the girls in there because it's like, look how heterosexual Bond is.
And I think some of it too is just I mean, like there's that saying that sex sells, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, they might have found it difficult to appeal if they didn't have something visual there for them.
It's when I write my romance novels, I used to have a rule that I always started it off with a sex scene because you want to grab them from the beginning. My father, believe it or not, read one of my last ones, and he was like, "Oh, it's very good, apart from all the sex. You don't need the sex to sell your books." And I'm like, "I think you do," but that well, I didn't want to keep you on the for too long, but I found that such a fascinating
We
insight.
can keep
Yeah, why
we
not?
can keep going if
Excellent.
you
I
want.
don't.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm free for a while, so
fantastic. Okay, so we've talked about that and the attractiveness. What was I going to say? Okay, so the other thing when I'm writing romance novels, this is because I'm a guy writing romance novels and it's largely done for women. Somebody said to me that romance novels, a lot of it is having a male character who treats the female character as a woman feels like she deserves or wants to be treated, and I think that's. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
yeah, I think so. So I read a really cool book two years ago now, and it's called 1 Billion Wicked Thoughts,
Ooh.
and yes, and it was written by two neuroscientists, and they basically took all of this data from the internet and analyzed it and kind of tried to put a book together to talk about like the sexual desires of men versus women, and it was very interesting. I think one of the things that I got from it was that men tend to be visual people, and so the book talks about like looking on porn sites and like the things that men would look at and like the search words that they would look at, and then which is like that's how they kind of came to that conclusion, where then they looked at the things that women looked at on the internet, and it was a lot of like romance and fan fiction. There's a whole chapter on romance novels and like and what the women look for, and there were things like vampires and like werewolves, and just all this other stuff. um and I found that really interesting because I think it's just the way that we interpret things could be a bit different. I mean, this is just kind of like a general. This doesn't apply to everybody, and everyone is different. Like people can be wired differently. Um, but I think just in general, like for me, reading those kinds of things, like I like to read about like what is happening, like how men treat women, but more of, if we're talking romance novels, like, how do I put this in words? I mean, it definitely is like not the visual, like you're not going to touch, it's like not describing the woman, like what the guy's going to do with the woman, not visual descriptions, but like more like in her head type of thing. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think I know exactly what you mean. It's like when I write the blurbs for books, often you'll write it from the male point of view. Basically, like you'll start it off like she stepped into the room and I knew I had to be with her. She was the one for me. All other women became invisible and stuff like that. And that's, that seems to be something that resonates with readers. And I think maybe that's it. But it is intellectual. It's not she walked into the room and I was like, wow, look at those legs. It was she walked into the room and there was something about her, but it's not necessarily physical.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on, I think.
It was so interesting you mentioned fan fiction as well, because I know fan fiction improved my writing so much. I've got a very dear friend of mine called Lauren. She reads a lot of fan fiction, and she was explaining to me the appeal to fan fiction to her was that you'd have pre-established characters that you knew from whatever, like Supernatural or an anime or something like that, and then you put them into a scenario, and it was almost you didn't have to do the backstory because you already knew who the characters were, and that meant instead of it being a novel-sized thing, you could just have a scene. And she said it was all about making the reader feel an emotion, and that was the strength, and by using pre-established characters, it meant you got past all of the character building stuff, so it made it super easy, and that was the appeal of fan fiction. And ever since then, in my writing, I've tried to evoke an emotion rather than just describe what happened, and I thought that was quite strong. Do you read fan fiction?
I used to. I haven't had time to as much. But I mean, like when I was in high school, and college, I would dabble a lot in fact fan fiction. I mean, because then back then, like the internet that we consumed, in the early 2000s, like
Yeah.
we didn't have video streaming and all of that kind of stuff. There was, like YouTube wasn't even a thing, right? So like people would turn to stories and fan fiction and stuff like that to kind of satisfy like their cravings, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember exactly that era. This is going to sound scandalous. There was a fan fiction series about Star Trek Voyager, and it was Captain Janeway was secretly, and they didn't show this on the show, a BDSM dominatrix who had like relationships with five or six of the different. And I was like, and they wrote dozens of these stories, and they're like the way they built up this thing, it was almost, if you watch the show, you could almost believe that actually behind the scenes it was happening, and it was just so
uh,
incredible the depth that it went into. So yeah, you're right, it takes me back thinking of nostalgia with like the early 2000s, where yeah, I remember I used to publish my stories on a text-based forum where you'd write that and you'd read those stories and you'd download them. So, wow, modern
yeah.
kids will never understand.
No, they won't. I mean, the sound of dial-up, right? Like
Hmm.
you have that sound etched in your head. And then I have to admit, so when I was in high school, once I started getting into my Bond phase, like I would download pictures off the internet, right? And so you would like from the movies, I like Tomorrow Never Dies, and I would try to download the picture, wait half an hour, and then print it. And then I actually have these collages for my binders back in school where
Oh,
it was like a collage of like the James Bond posters and scenes from the movie. But I back then like I didn't have Photoshop, so I had to literally print the picture out, then cut it out, and then put it on a piece of paper. But I mean like it took forever to download those damn pictures. Like you would download it and then I go do homework and then it'd be like, all right, but so then you would turn to text, right?
yeah. I remember it was when Tomorrow Never Dies came out. I clicked on download, and then I went to my college classes for that day, and then I came back, and because it had taken all day to download the trailer, and I was watching the trailer, and I was so stoked. And it was a tiny, tiny little flickery thing like that, and I'm like, this looks amazing. Um, okay, you mentioned earlier that you just read that book. Tell me about the books you read, because you must read books. You've got a huge bookshelf behind you, which I know belongs to your husband. I imagine yours is twice as big. What books do you read?
So I read all sorts of books. I'm not too big on the nonfiction, but I think that might be changing. We'll see.
Hmm.
Um, I actually had just come off of like a huge 6-year endeavor of like getting my license as a landscape architect.
Oh wow!
So so my books were basically like reading like within the industry, and I'm so over it. um, so I have been working on the Fleming Reading Challenge
Yep.
with a group of folks, and so that's been a lot of fun. I had only read like the first 4 books up to Diamond. Wait, I read up to Diamonds, and then I stopped because like life happened. So it's nice that I have been able to go back and start reading all of these. So I have read Casino through the 4th book is Diamonds, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So I read up to that, and then I did read Man with the Golden Gun in high school, and I haven't read it since. So, and then I've read some of the continuation novels. Um, so I'm working through all of that with with some friends, and then I do like vampire novels. So big fan of Anne Rice,
Yeah.
and yeah, the whole vampire series there. I have not read Twilight. I don't plan on reading Twilight because that's not.
I'm
The kind of
I
vamp.
have a secret soft spot for Twilight, which I'll confess sometimes, because I was like, I understand everybody's criticisms of it, but it was so popular because something about it resonated with people, and I'm like, you, that's so that's my secret though. So don't tell anyone. I mean, basically I'm going to
Okay.
put this video on YouTube so everyone knows. But um, that's so why vampires?
I think it's that air of mystery,
Yeah,
the like you can't have it, but you want it
yeah,
type of thing. Yeah. And then just especially with like Anne Rice's characters where, the vampires have been alive for decades and like have all this knowledge and experience and stuff like that. It's like fruit that you can't have, right? Just that desire. Um I really like, and then and at the same time I think it's, the way that she describes them, like they can be vicious beasts.
yeah.
Um
I think that's one of the effective things about Twilight was the fact that you had this character Edward, and admittedly he was hundreds of years old and he was trying to date a high school student, so there are possible ethical issues there. But it was she used the vampirism as like a metaphor. It's like he was, he could barely withhold himself and things like that, which is interesting. So maybe that's the appeal of it. It's like vampires are very cultured and cool and literally cold, except underneath they've got that ravenous beast that could like.
yeah, that's probably accurate. I mean, there's quite a few other vampire series, right? I mean, there's also the oh, I forgot who wrote them. The Stackhouse
Yes,
vampire.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm very for who I'm just trying to Suki Stackhouse. I'm trying to remember the author's name. It was uh Charlene Harris.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah. Because I was thinking there was the other one who wrote Anita Blake Vampire Hunter, or uh that's it. She's very famous. Her name is Laurel K. Hamilton, and everyone used to be like, "Oh, there's so much sex in her books." And then she was like, "Hold my beer," and now there's even more sex in her books. But it was about a vampire hunter and things. And I like those because yeah, Suki is a very strong female character. Anita Blake is a very strong female character. In the Anne Rice books, you have very strong female characters, even if they're not like the iconic vampires.
Right, right, yeah.
And I think that's I don't know. I find that really really interesting. So will you team if have you ever seen the Twilight movies if you haven't read the books?
Mm-mm, no, I haven't.
Oh wow! So I can't even ask you if you're
Yeah.
Team Edward or Team Jacob.
No, you can't. But I think I kind of fall in that like some of it I think is also that don't touch my, imagination of what vampires is like. It's like being an Anne Rice person. Like I don't want to tamper with with that.
Yeah, I mean, in
But
Twilight, the vampires, instead of crumbling to dust in the sunlight, they sparkle.
oh,
So I can understand.
that's really
Yeah, I can understand. I can completely understand where you're coming from with that. It's like I want my vampires to when the sunlight comes, instead of look fabulous. I think the last book it was literally the no it was the first book. It was literally the case of he had a suicide plot where he was going to go to Italy and take his shirt off in the sunlight, and then everyone would know he's a vampire because he's sparkling and kill him. And I'm like, the plot twist is he takes his shirt off. That's a bold one. I like that. So when you're buying and reading books, what appeals to you about them? What makes you pick the books that you pick?
um. Hmm. Sometimes it's the art
Hmm.
for sure. Just like a wine bottle, if there is appealing art, like then I might pick it up. A lot of times, it, I kind of rely on like if you're looking at books on Amazon, like the recommended, reading, or even I don't know if Goodreads does that as well.
Yeah, I think they
Um,
do.
but suggested reading, that's also helpful. Sometimes like recommendations from friends.
And what's going to
Um,
grab you in a book description? What's going to make you want to read the book?
that's a good question. I think if the plot needs to be interesting for sure. So if you can convey the plot, but also make it mysterious, like kind of know what the gist is without spoiling the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's probably the most important thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. I read some very strange books. Like the other type of books that I actually enjoy reading is it's young adult books.
I get that. Like the
Yeah, because they're a quick read, but a lot of it is that coming of age and fascinate. Like there's something changing within the person. Like there's a growing up moment, and I can relate to that a lot. Even though like I'm mature and
well, I
stuff
think
like
because
that.
something like that happened to you at one point, so even 20 years down the line, you can still relate to it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I'm not really sure now that I think about it.
Okay, so
Because a lot of times I just pick up the book and just go for it. I don't like sometimes I kind of read it. And I'm like, oh, that's not bad, and then um, but a good plot. Yeah, you're making me think.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Well, I was going to ask a completely different question. You can feel free to
Okay,
completely ignore this.
sure.
But talking about that, when you were young, like when was the, what was it like the first time you fell in love? What was it about the person that you like attracted you to them? I have no idea. It could be your husband. It could be someone completely different. Your husband could be listening to this, being like, "Oh my goodness, there was." But what was it that grabbed you about them, and what was it like? And
I think just personality.
mm,
Like with people, like if the people that I did like or fall in love. The people that was attracted to, like even when I was a kid, was people that I really liked that I could get along with, and um, yeah, I don't know. It was interesting because like as a kid, I actually kind of had a hard time because I was and still am a bit of a tomboy. Like I think that's also probably why I like James Bond because I
yeah.
dabble in like that kind of stuff. So a lot of times my friends were guys.
Hmm.
And that made it kind of hard because it's like you get along with them and like you could talk about games and just and like I talk about like video games or like the things that they were interested, and then when you have that moment of like, oh, you're kind of cool and like we have things in common, I kind of like you, and then they shut the door, and I mean that, and that's very typical, right, of that age when we're young. um and I feel like that you don't really, and I mean even with my husband, it was like I remember the days that he told me, oh, I like these kinds of things but they're kind of weird. And then I was like, oh no, you're not weird, you just haven't found the right people. And then that kind of blossomed from there. It's just, I think it's just connecting, like having things in common, really.
Oh, I love that. It's fun. You made me think of that. The first, so I knew of the Bond community. Well, no, I didn't even know of the Bond community. I knew of David Zaritsky from the Bond experience because we actually like tangentially worked in the same area. And then he held that Operation Gatherall, where there were all the Bond fans. And I remember going there, and I was like, "Oh my god, these are my people." And I remember meeting
Right.
like Joe Darlington and Ray from the Bond Armory and stuff like that, and Mike Poplawski, and just chatting to them, and I was like, these are my people. These people get it. They're interested in the same things as me. Because I was always such a weird kid growing up because I didn't like sports. Unless it involved a gun or a horse, I wasn't interested, and like I wasn't into to supporting football teams and stuff like this, and I wasn't necessarily terribly good with the ladies, and I liked clothes and I liked fashion and I liked cars and I liked stuff like that, and then yeah, to meet the Bond community, it was like these are my people, this is my tribe, and so it was great. And that's one of the things I
Yeah.
really like about the whole James Bond thing, that you meet people. But what I really love about it, it's like you and I are chatting because we got together because of Bond. But I find you interesting in so many different ways because of so many different things that you're into, like the hoop work. Being you're a landscape architect. I mean, how
Yeah,
did you get into that? That's amazing.
that was an accident.
I hate that. I wake up one day and I'm like, oh, I'm a landscape architect now.
So, yeah, like trying to find my career path has been interesting. It's in high school, I had kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything just to kind of see where I wanted to go, and I kind of had this epiphany that I did not want to sit in front of a computer or be in an office all day. So computer programming was out, and because I was taking some classes at the time, and then I started taking some architectural drawing classes just for fun in college. I so I don't know how it is today with the education system, but when I was in high school, I could also take community college. Like there was as an extra, and it didn't cost anything. It cost $1.
Ooh.
That was the student body fee, and all you had to do was pay for the books. So if there was space in the class, you could take the class. Um, so I ended up taking an architectural drawing class, and I really liked it. And so by the time I had finished high school, I wanted to be an architect.
Mm-hmm.
And I only applied to a couple of colleges in California. And, when you're doing the application, it says like first major choice and then second major choice. And so one of the universities, I had put architecture and then landscape architecture as my second choice. And so I got accepted into that college, not as an architect major, but as a landscape architect. And I was like, well, this gets me out of the house. I get to move far away from my, and like be on my own. I'll just go to college and figure it out when I get there. And then once I got there, at that time, the architecture program was impacted and they weren't really accepting new people. And I had made the effort to try and switch. And the way that the department had treated me, like disrespectfully, like they're like, okay, well, if you want to do the application, and I'd been asking for a while, they're like, okay, you need to turn it in by like tomorrow with like your portfolio and all this stuff. Or like there was like a week. And I was like, well, I'm in the middle of school, like taking a full, load of classes, and you want me to produce like something to submit, within the week. That was not possible. So then I was like, you know what, I'll give this landscape architect, classes like a try and see where I go. And it ended up being a lot. It exceeded my expectations. So it's been a lot of fun. It requires a lot of different things. Like there's mathematical work, there's scientific work and horticulture, and then there's the artistic design, aspect. So there's a lot of different things that all come together into one career. And then the career itself kind of is pretty expansive. Like you have, like I myself am like a sole person who does like small projects and things like that. And then you have big companies that do big things, like like huge parks and huge developments. And then you have people who work for like the national park system. Like it's just all over the place. So it's kind of nice that you have that freedom. It's like you have your knowledge and skills base, but like the option of where you want to go within the field is also pretty big.
That's amazing. And when did you graduate and sort of start that?
So I graduated 2007, and then that's when we had kind of that big economic
Oh, I
hit.
remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So like it's been a struggle for me, um like trying to find work and stuff like that then. So yeah, it's been over 10 years now. Like one of the difficult parts, and I don't know if this applies to every state, but for California, you actually have to do 2 full years of apprenticeship before you can even start testing to get your license.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then not only that, but you have to have the 4 years of going to an accredited college.
Yep.
So, and if you don't go to an accredited college, it's even longer. I think it's maybe like 6 years of experience or something like that. I think there's like an experience equivalent, but it's pretty hard to do if you're not already working in the industry. So at the time, when I graduated, like I couldn't even get a job to get the apprenticeship hours to even test. So like that's why I'm only just getting my license now. Is like I had to try and secure the work to get my apprenticeship done before I could move forward. So
That's crazy, isn't it? And you think like everything around the entire world needs landscape architects. I was just thinking of the where I live. It's like so many things that, and you don't even think about it. That you think it's just there, but then somebody went into and thought about the whole process. One of my best friends is an architect, and it's funny whenever I go to a building with him, he's telling me about the thought that went into all these different things, and I'm like, wow, you just take it for granted.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we do everything outside of the building. That's what I say. So anything as small as like, the parking planters, to people's houses, to parks, like if there's a tree outside, someone had thought to put it there. So
That's okay. And you see, you could get hired as like a Bond villain's landscaper. That could be amazing. It's like, okay, I want to be able to have like the pool with the sharks right here, and then we'll have like the secret tunnels that go down here. We want the swimming pool to open so the airplane can come out, and I don't know. This could be a whole new thing. I quite like that actually.
yeah.
So believe it or not, I'm actually thinking right now of a romance novel about a woman who gets hired to do the landscaping for a supervillain. That could work.
Mm,
Okay, watch the space.
okay.
Okay, we've been going on for an hour, but I'm going to keep you for a couple more minutes if that's okay, because I was going to ask you. Okay, so you do the hoops and you read and things like that. What else are you into? What does Jocelyn do in her spare time?
So I'm into a lot of different things.
Well, that's good.
um, yeah, yeah. So besides the Bond community, something else that I am really into is actually Tiki culture.
Mhm.
And that's revolved around like Tiki bars, and Tiki bars kind of came out like after World War II. And so that whole like era and time capsule, like there's a whole community of people who are really into it. So um like post what was it?
I'm
I can't remember the name of the word, but like modernism architecture,
yeah.
in like the 60s era. So like there's actually a little bit of crossover with like 60s, TV shows and movies and stuff like that. But there's also, so yeah. So Tiki is like the whole, it's basically everything that came from the South Pacific,
Yeah.
and they brought it over here because the veterans wanted to kind of have a way to escape like the ways of life. So it's actually another form of escapism where it's like tropical, like Hawaiian stuff and like tropical cocktails, and the vibrant colors. And then we start getting into collecting. So then we start collecting art. Like I have a bunch of friends who are all artists, and then a lot of people collect tiki mugs. So and there's like a whole revolution of that. And then there's also a revival of like tiki bars as well. So that's kind of one of my other big
I
passions.
love that. It's that. No, it's so funny because you're right. You had all of the veterans and stuff. They came back from World War II, where they were stationed in the South Pacific, and then created that. So I write books about a biker gang, and biker culture happened after World War II. All these soldiers came back. They couldn't fit back into society. They had all these surplus bikes being brought back from Europe, so they just created. And so isn't it funny that the two are like both exist as a result of like counterculture of the following the war? I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, tiki stuff. Do you have a tiki bar in your house?
Um, so I just moved into this house like 2 years ago, and we're still kind of sorting through and unpacking, but eventually we'll have like a small den. Like it's not a room, it's kind of this awkward space in our house, but we'll do it up as a tiki area. So then I'm trying to figure out like where do I fit my Bond collection? Because space is limited.
I know that.
Um,
Uh,
but actually, I have a small mug collection, and I've had to be good about like collecting stuff. And this actually kind of goes with Bond too. Is like some people buy everything Bond, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't have space in my house for all this stuff. So a lot of times, like when I'm collecting stuff, it's more of like, can I use it besides displaying it? Because then if I can use it, then I can enjoy it. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
my wife and I have big arguments because I have like my bookshelf of my Bond stuff, and she's just like, that's in my space. And I'm like, so before we wrap up, I was going to say this tiki stuff blows my mind. I have a friend who runs a YouTube channel called Adult Beverages, where
mm.
I'm often do stuff with him, and we drink alcohol and stuff like that. He is an architect, and
Oh,
yeah, I was going to say maybe we could do like another live stream at some point in the future where we drink tiki cocktails, because I have one specifically that is like South Pacific inspired, and it's very easy to
Oh,
get. So
okay.
maybe we could do that and just chat about stuff like that. I think that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, I have kept you for an hour, so I'm going to wrap it up. But oh my goodness, it has been such fun speaking to you. Hopefully, you won't be a stranger.
Oh, no, no, not at all. Thank you for having me. It was nice chatting with you and talking about things beyond the normal Bond stuff.
I know I'm weird and I go off down the little rabbit holes and stuff like that. But the nice thing about the Bond community is there are other weird people in there who will go down the same rabbit hole with me. I think being weird is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not to say that you're weird, but if you are weird, it's weird in a good way.
Eclectic.
I like that. Eclectic. Perfect. Right. Well, I'm going to stop recording now, but I'm going to hang on. I'm not going to hang up. So.